there. Good morning, and welcome to Eastrose Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I am Charlene Wood, your worship leader for today. We are happy you have chosen to join us in online worship today via our YouTube channel. If you are visiting for the first time, welcome. We're glad you sought us out, and we hope you will return in the future. For those attending the service online, please list your name in the YouTube chat. This will help in keeping attendance. The week of January 10th, the Eastrose board decided to close the building for Sunday services for the month of January. This action was taken as a further precaution against the Omicron variant, which is surging locally. The board will reevaluate whether or not to reopen the building in early February. We are fortunate that we have an online capacity to join together in spirit, love, and worship until we can safely return in person to our lovely Eastrose Chapel. If you have joys or concerns or announcements that you wish to share during the service, you can do so by writing them in the chat space on YouTube. They will be shared at the appropriate point in the service. For future reference, you also have the option to email a joy or concern or announcement to worship@eastrose.org. That's worship@eastrose.org, no later than the Saturday before the service. And after the conclusion of each service, there will be a Zoom cafe conversation time where all can visit, where you can see each other's faces and catch up on the news in your lives. You just will need to exit YouTube after the service and log in to the Zoom link, which will be provided in 3 different places: in the chat on YouTube, on our website, or in Pedals. So you can access the Zoom link from any of those 3 locations. Our congregation honors those who first lived on the land where our church stands. Traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kailapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes and bands. We thank the original caretakers of this land and their descendants. In peace, may we share this land and honor one another. Our speaker today is our own Reverend Patty Pomerantz. Her topic, Spiritual but Not Religious, will explore how Unitarian Universalists define themselves in the absence of a single unifying theology. Thank you, Mary, for that beautiful music. Come sit by our fire. Come sit by our fire and let us share stories. Let me hear your tales of far-off lands, wanderer, and I will tell you of my travels. Share your experience of the holy with me, worshiper, and I will tell you of that which I find divine. Come and stay, lover of leaving, for ours is no caravan of despair, but of hope. We would hear your stories of grief and sorrow as readily as those of joy and laughter, for there is a time and a place and a hearing for all the stories of this world. Stories are the breath and word of the Spirit of life, that power that we name love. Come, for our fire is warm, and we have seats for all. Come again and yet again. Come, speak to me of what fills your heart, what engages your mind, what resides in your soul. Come, let us worship together. We begin our worship service with the lighting of the chalice. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome. This tiny flame is a symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. On Waking by John O'Donohue. I give thanks for arriving safely in a new dawn, for the gift of eyes to see the world, the gift of mind to feel at home in my life, the waves of possibility breaking on the shore of dawn, the harvest of the past that awaits my hunger, and all the furtherings this new day will bring. Kathy Huff provides us with our opening words today, Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, be present with us this hour. Join us today as we gather in a wider search for truth and purpose. In this quest, may we greet one another with open hearts and minds. May we inspire each other to consider new questions and seek deeper meaning. And may we cultivate wisdom and compassion. Let all who enter this sanctuary in person or online see a welcome face, hear a kind word, and find comfort in this community. And may all that is done and said here today be in service of love and justice.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, yours is no worshiper, lover is leaving, yours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, whoever you are, condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, yours is no worshiper, lover is leaving. Come yet again, come.
Some of you may have heard this story before, God in Between. It's a story about a little town, and the people in the little town live in houses with no windows. And outside their houses, they are either walking through tall weeds, or falling into deep holes, or tripping over rocks the size of watermelons. Well, they're disturbed about this, so they gather together in the village square, and they say, I heard somebody talk once about God and that God can solve our problems. Let's find God. And then they stand there among the tall weeds and the holes and the rocks the size of watermelons. And they say, what do we do? Well, they look towards the big hill that is at the end of the town. And there are two houses there with one window each. And the people who live in those houses, they call ones who can see through windows. So they approach them and they say, well, you can see through windows, maybe you can see God. Will you try to find God for us? And so they say, okay. And they walk through the grass, and they fall in the holes, and they trip over the rocks until they get to the edge of town, and then they go up the big hill. And the people in the town think they'll probably never see them again. Well, the woman who could see through windows went first to the top of another very large hill. And she tried to touch the clouds. And then she looked down and got really dizzy. But she didn't find God. So then she said, well, maybe God is on the water. And she went into a boat on the ocean. And it got a little rough. And she felt like maybe this is what it feels like to be in the belly of a fish. I can't stay here. And she gets off of the ocean. Now, meanwhile, the man who could see through windows goes first to the desert. And he walks and he walks and he walks, and he's all sunburned and his feet are burned, but he doesn't find God. He says, well, maybe God's in a cave. And he goes into a cave, which is really nice for a while because it soothes his sunburn. But then it starts getting a little spooky and inky, and he thinks he hears voices, and he doesn't want to be there alone anymore. So he leaves the cave. Well, the woman and man who could see through windows thought that perhaps the other one of them had found God. But when they got together, the woman could see from the man's drooped shoulders that he hadn't found God, and the man could see because of her eyes that she hadn't found God. And so they sit down next to each other, and they talk, and they tell each other their stories. Well, the next day, somebody in the town sees them reappearing over the hill. And they come running up to them and they surround them and they say, tell us what happened. And the woman said, well, I went to the top of a hill and I couldn't find God. And then I went onto the ocean and I couldn't find God. And the man said, well, I went into the desert and I couldn't find God. And then I went into a cave and I couldn't find God. And the townspeople start arguing and bickering so loudly that they don't notice what's happening to the man and the woman who could see through windows. They're busy going, see, I told you there wasn't a God. Well, in the meantime, the man and the woman who could see through windows put windows in each other's houses in all the rooms. And then they started clearing away the rocks and weeding the grasses and filling the holes and building a path between one another's houses. Well, somebody turns their head and notices this and says, how are you doing all this? And they say, with God's help. And the people say, but you told us that you didn't find God. And they said, Well, we did. And then they talked very softly to each other. And the people are straining to hear. And they want to know, where was God? Where was God? And the man and the woman who could see through windows said, God was in between. God was between us. The end.
Now let us listen to Spirit of Life.
Spirit of light, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the air, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
The Church encourages all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support the self-supporting church and her many ministries. Half of this week's offering supports the nonprofit Snowcap Community Charities. Snowcap provides food, clothing, advocacy, and other services to low-income people in East Multnomah County. For those of you at home, you can donate by using your phone to scan the code shown on your screen, and you'll be sent to the Eastrose website donation page. Or you may choose to donate after the service by visiting our website and clicking on the Donate button. If you are a first-time visitor, we invite you to pass the virtual basket by and truly be our guest. Your presence today is your gift to us. The gifts of the congregation will now be most gratefully received. Thank you for your support, which fuels this community and keeps the flame of justice, community, and love burning brightly to warm ourselves and to be a beacon in a world threatened by division and fear. Thank you so much, Mary. Beautiful as always. I happen to be standing, Mary Oliver. I don't know where prayers go or what they do. Do cats pray while they sleep, half asleep in the sun? Does the opossum pray as it crosses the street? The sunflower, the old black oak growing older every year. I know I can walk through the world along the shore or under the trees, with my mind filled with things of little importance, in full self-attendance, a condition I can't really call being alive. Is a prayer a gift or a petition, or does it matter? The sunflowers blaze, maybe that's their way. Maybe the cats are sound asleep, maybe not. While I was thinking this, I happened to be standing just outside my door with my notebook open, which is the way I begin every morning. Then a wren in the privet began to sing. He was positively drenched in enthusiasm. I don't know why, and well, why not? I wouldn't persuade you from whatever you believe or whatever you don't. That's your business. But I thought of the wrens singing, what could this be if it isn't a prayer? So I just listened, my pen in the air.
Come again. Please, come again, whoever you are. Religious, infidel, heretic, or pagan, even if you promised 100 times, and 100 times you broke your promise. This door is not the door of hopelessness and frustration. This door is open for everybody. Come. Come as you are. Those words, as were the words of our opening hymn and the words of our call to worship, all from one poem by Rumi, a Sufi mystic of the 13th century. I think they also represent definitions of Unitarian Universalism, a place where your views are welcome, no matter what they are. A place where you can identify as religious, infidel, heretic, pagan, etc., etc., etc. What Rumi is saying is represented by our first principle, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, and the fourth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and most of the others by inference. The important message for we Unitarian Universalists is not just that your beliefs are welcome, but that you have beliefs, religious beliefs. What makes something religious? That is not a question I can answer fully. As Wikipedia says, there is no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes a religion. Far be it from me to attempt something Wikipedia can't. After all, it tells me there are an estimated 10,000 religions worldwide. However, there are two primary etymologies of the word. The word comes from Old French and Anglo-Norman about 1200 AD and means respect for the sense of right, moral obligation, sacred, reverence for the gods. This is the language of the institutional church and its doctrine, derived from the Latin word religio that is popular today. However, Cicero, who lived in the 1st century BC, believed that religio actually comes from religare, which means to choose, go over, consider carefully, again. St. Augustine, who lived in the 4th century, and Joseph Campbell, who lived in the last, also agree with this language. This is the language of binding, as in ligament, together. And it isn't until the 1500s that the word religion was first used to distinguish between the domain of the church and the domain of civil authorities. Now, if we go to spiritual, Wikipedia links 34 nouns with spiritual, which it says is the adjective for spirit. That's helpful. It also has a section on spiritual but not religious, but mostly it's just hedging its bets, noting there is no single widely agreed upon definition of spirituality. So for the purpose of this reflection, I'm going to use my definitions, though I'm tempted to use that of a colleague of mine who says, spirituality is the part of religion we like. Religion is the stuff we don't like. My way of distinguishing between the two is that religion is about the institutional and lives in our heads. Spiritual is about the felt, about personal experiences, and lives in the heart. Now, I'm quite sure that there is something you want to hear from me on this subject that I'm going to leave out. But I'll be happy to try and address whatever that is in the Zoom cafe which follows the service. For the link, you can see our website or pedals or the chat. What all of this says to me is that the meanings of the words spiritual and religious are used differently by different people going back at least 8 centuries. Now, the philosopher, historian, and psychologist William James, who lived mostly in the last half of the 19th century and who wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience, makes a key distinction between religious and spiritual. He says there exists one great partition which divides the religious field. On one side, is the institutional, and on the other, personal religion. This personal religion is spirituality. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who also lived in the 19th century, the father of transcendentalism, taught an intuitive, experiential, individual approach to religion. And he actually left Unitarian ministry to speak solely about transcendentalism, but we claim him anyway. Now, one of my favorite UU heretics, Theodore Parker, a contemporary of Emerson, once gave a sermon on this called A Discourse on the Transient and Permanent in Christianity, in which he essentially said, everything that we define as Christianity, created by humans, the institutional church, is not permanent. Only that which was described by Jesus is. Only Jesus' words are permanent. His colleagues were not too happy. They tried to get him to resign. He refused, and that's why I like him. The problem for Unitarian Universalists is that some of us like the religious head part, and some of us like the spiritual heart stuff. Some of us like both, and I imagine there are a small number who don't like either, though I wonder why you are in religious community. My premise is you can't have one without the other. Let's look at religion in the context of community, like Eastrose. We don't often come together to talk about either religion or spirituality. We come together, especially now, for companionship, support when we have problems, and to share joys. We come together to study, though not very often. We come together because we like one another, for the most part. We come together as families, Sometimes we come together as families to drop the kids off to be watched by our elders so that our parents can get some time for themselves. But what makes a church? Everything I just mentioned could occur at a community center, a neighborhood, a social group. What do we have in common? We can't really say our beliefs because there are as many different beliefs as there are members. We have our principles, which tell us how to act, but we also have our sources. We don't talk about them as much as we do our principles. You may not even know about them, but they are as important to me as the principles. The sources begin by saying, the living tradition we share draws from many sources, and there are 6 of them. Direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, words and deeds of prophetic men and women, wisdom from the world's religions, Jewish and Christian teachings, humanist teachings, and spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions. The sources make us accountable to one another by obligating us to respect thoughts that are different from our own. So, for instance, if you see yourself as a humanist, the first Humanist Manifesto was written at the beginning of the 20th century, and it says these things, among others. Humanism recognizes that man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to his interaction with his natural environment and with his social heritage. The individual born into a particular culture is largely molded by that culture. It also says, humanism asserts that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. Obviously, humanism does not deny the possibility of realities as yet undiscovered, but it does insist that the way to determine the existence and value of any and all realities is by means of intelligent inquiry and by the assessment of their relations to human needs. Religion must formulate its hopes and plans in the light of the scientific spirit and method. And finally, it says, religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Nothing human is alien to the religious. It includes labor, art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, recreation, all that is in its degree expressive of intelligently satisfying human living. The distinction between the sacred and the secular can no longer be maintained. And by the way, 15 of the 34 signers were Unitarian or Universalist. And there are 2 subsequent manifestos. Now, if you believe in God, none of that sat very well with you, I imagine. And here's another one. Perhaps you consider yourself agnostic. Here's what Michael Krasny, author of Spiritual Envy, An Agnostic's Quest, has to say about being an agnostic. A group of Bay Area skeptics have offered a significant cash reward to anyone who can prove, under their controlled conditions, a paranormal phenomenon. To date, no one has claimed the cash. I think the sort of display it would take to satisfy this challenge is analogous to what agnostics would like to see or experience that would convince us that a supreme being or higher consciousness exists. The agnostic mind seeks answers, but the available answers are all too often lead to the inexplicable and more questions. And, of course, I could go on. We are atheists, pagan, Wiccan, Native American, or perhaps an Eastern tradition like Buddhism, Hindu, or Jainist. Each of these religious traditions has its own set of sacred writings to guide its followers. It's unreasonable to think that any one of us would be conversant in all of these religions. And I'm only at the beginning of a very long list. But we could find those among us whose beliefs are different from our own and learn about each other's. Now let's move to spirituality. Whatever you believe in your head, spirituality is how you feel it, what your heart says. And regardless of our beliefs, the way we act on them, or how they inform our behavior, is the spiritual. I believe we all have thoughts that inform our beliefs, but we also have feelings. And I think everyone has had at least one spiritual experience in their lives. If you've seen a child born, if there's a special place that gives you peace, for me it's the ocean. If there's a special moment in your life that you return to over and over because of how it makes you feel, if you've ever been in love, all these experiences put you in touch with something that is greater than you, that transcends you, and that's the spiritual. We all have these experiences, but we don't describe them the same way. Some use God language or some other word that describes that. Love, spirit, mystery, great mother. Whatever term you use depends on what you believe religiously. Some of you don't connect what you believe to how you feel, but there's always a connection. So what does this mean for Unitarian Universalists? It means that we can never assume the way we use language is the way it's used by everyone else. It means that most likely there are differences in what we believe. It means that getting to know something about each other in a religious community like Eastrose will probably put you in touch with things you have not known before. And it is that deepening that is at the core of our faith. As a matter of fact, I think Unitarian Universalist demands this of us. Here's another way to look at it. Let's say we each come with our own language of the Spirit. Another way to look at the old language is to look at religion, or religare, as rebinding, like ligaments bind. When we come together with different spiritualities, religion takes us out of that individual realm of the Spirit and reunites us, reattaches us, rebinds us into a community. Like our interdependent web of all existence of our seventh principle, fed by all our independent spiritualities in community. The community becomes religious. It's also why I think you can't be religious without being spiritual. And you can't be spiritual without being religious. What Unitarian Universalism asks of us is to ground our actions in a set of beliefs that work for you. There is no separation between what we think and what we feel, what we believe and what we do. And it doesn't matter how many different ideas and actions we weave together, as long as we do weave them together. This is the promise of Unitarian Universalism. This is also the way of peace. We need the weaving. We need the binding. We need to come together so that we can bring this saving message to a world that needs it more than ever.
Prayer for leaving a sacred space. Creator, Spirit, God of many names and one transforming love, thank you. Thank you for this space, both physical and online, that is home to our community. This physical and online space is sacred space. We are leaving a space that has been made holy, has been made sacred through all that has happened here. We give thanks for all that has been brought here, all that has been left here, all that has been held here. We will continue to hold sacred the learning, the experiences, the relationships that make this space holy. Amen.
And as we leave this holy space, let us spend the week thinking about those who have had losses and celebrating those who have joys to share. And let us remember to use the language that we have for our beliefs, for what we do, for how we talk with one another, so that when we come together again, we will be one community of love and hope. Amen.
Beautiful. As we come to the end of the service, it's time for announcements and thank yous. Of course, I'd like to thank Reverend Patty Pomerantz for bringing us the message today, Mary Reese for her beautiful playing and music, Phyllis Adams and John Netherton, who you never see on camera, but our AV technicians who keep everything running and going and keep us all being able to share together. We really, really appreciate them. And I also want to send out a special thank you to Blotty Arzetta and Larry Adams, who built like mission control back there for our new AV equipment. It's a very nice wooden structure that keeps everything where it's supposed to be, and everything's in one place, so we have our mission control, thanks to Blatty and Larry. Thank you so much for doing that. Also, as far as announcements, for 2022, there's a very ambitious work party every Saturday, weather permitting. This is mainly for the grounds and sometimes in the building from 10 a.m. to noon every Saturday. And you can contact Blatty Arzada if you want more information about that. And for next week, our message will be received by Jessica Sand, who is our speaker, and she will be talking about patience is a gift. Now we can transition into our Zoom Cafe conversation time. Last week was the first week we did it, and it was a real success, and everybody loved being able to see each other's faces and talk in person and catch up. So again, you can find the Zoom link in the YouTube chat, the website, or in Petals. And Reverend Patty will be joining you at the Zoom conversation if you want to talk any more about the message from today. So I hope your week is wonderful, and I hope you tune in next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Bless.